I have been quite actively involved in many of the debates in India on accountability and transparency. And in my current role, I run a think tank, and the accountability initiative work that we do is embedded there. I thought I'd just spend a few minutes talking to you about what this idea of accountability means and why it's relevant in our current discourse. And also touch upon what I think are some of the very big public policy challenges that India is beginning to confront, for which I think we need to really shift how we think about the way public policies are engaged with, designed and implemented in the Indian policy context, as you all are hopefully going to be the next generation, or actually now you are the generation that may lead us into a better future. I thought I'd take this opportunity to share some of my concerns and the challenges that we face in our everyday life as policy actors. So let me start with this. I think it's become very commonplace when we talk about Indian policy making to consistently argue that policy design more or less works, policy implementation is where things go wrong. Sometime back in 2009, the economist Lan Pritchett coined this phrase called the flailing state, which sort of has become now a repeated framework through which people describe the Indian state as a state which sort of has its head, and brain more or less in place. It sort of seems to be in control and knows what it's doing. But its inability to translate what's being articulated here all the way down into the fingers and the toes through the nerve cells, that's where things start going wrong. And the head simply doesn't have an ability to control things. And I think that this idea of the flailing state has been very much the dominant way in which we have thought about, articulated, and frankly experienced public policy making, particularly on things that matter to the everyday lives of our citizens: drinking water, sanitation, education, health, so on and so forth. You talk to anybody sitting in Delhi, they'll always say we've got the design right, but the states don't get things done. You talk to people in the states, they'll say, well, these matters are out of our hands. It's the district isn't able to implement things. You go to the district, they'll tell you it's the block's problem. You go to the block, they'll tell you it's the district's problem. And then as the bureaucracy is blaming itself, there's also the politicians who are all coming into play and not letting bureaucrats stick around for too long, and constantly putting political pressure to push favors, to dispense patronage. And you talk to citizens at large and they will always tell you the big challenge is corruption. And it's in this narrative that the idea of accountability really came to the center stage in the Indian discourse on policy making back in the 1990s. In fact, the idea of accountability towards the late 90s and early 2000s caught the global world by storm. And one of the first things that the US President Obama at the time in 2008-9 did was to set up what he called an open government partnership, where different governments across the world were signing up to commit to making their governments more transparent, and therefore through transparency, making their governments more open and therefore more accountable, so citizens could actually figure out what this big black box of government is all about, what they're doing, and put pressure on the system to make things change. The Indian story was in some senses even more powerful, because the whole narrative of accountability gained political center stage very much from the perspective of grassroots social movements. And the leader in this movement, of course, was Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan in particular, although there were many other efforts going on strengthening this narrative of accountability. And in essence, I mean, it would be a different lecture to go into the details of that, but in essence what it was trying to do was to say that the dynamic of the relationship that ordinary citizens have with the government, with actors of the state, is very much one that is embedded in a relationship of patronage. It is one that is embedded in the Mai Baap Sarkar. And the only way that democracy can be actualized and realized, the only way in which that Mai Baap Sarkar would move away from being a Mai Baap Sarkar to a Sarkar that actively delivers on rights of citizens, is by strengthening the ability of citizens to place claims on government. is by ensuring that citizenship is actually, in some senses, more active. The kinds of things that groups like you are trying to do, which is to essentially mobilize and exercise your rights as citizens and pressure the government to do what it's committed itself to doing. And it said that one of the first things that we need to do is to make the government more transparent. That the Indian state has had this ability to hide behind its own papers, its own dynamic of operating, and invokes the Official Secrets Act often to claim it's doing things, and citizens have absolutely no ability to question the state because we don't have access to these documents. So that's it was in this framing that the right to information emerged through these grassroots movements into this larger push on transparency of government. And of course there was a question of how do you take transparency and actually shift the envelope of how government functions. And it was that continuum of access to information, platforms for citizens to mobilize through things like social audits, through other means, to actively place claims of accountability on government would make government shift the envelope a little bit. And in essence, it was in a sense trying to address that challenge of the flailing state, that there are sets of things that the government is supposed to do. It tends not to do it because citizens are unaware of what government has to do, or don't have the tools or means by which citizens can pressure the system to do what it's supposed to do. And the way in which therefore one can, and I'm simplifying, but in essence this is what it was, the way in which systems can, the state can function better is when a mobilized citizenry pushes, pressures, places claims, and pushes the system to work. And that has very much been the framework in which the attempts to try and shift the policy envelope on how government functions, particularly when it comes to core public services, has been framed for the better part of the last 20 years. We've seen significant legislation. The National Rural Employment Guarantee Act was an important case when in the run-up to the Employment Guarantee Act, there were lots of big questions being asked about, how can the Indian state be putting so much money into things? It's all going to end up, feeding the hands of the block officers and the local politicians. One journalist famously described the NREGA as, you'd be better off taking a helicopter and dropping cash into villages than going through something like NREGA because of all the corruption. So in some senses, we have tended to conflate this idea of corruption and inability of the state to actually deliver. We've conflated the idea of corruption with the flailing state. It's seen as both have sort of come together as the same set of problems that have created the perfect storm of a state that sort of gets its paperwork all right, but somehow fails entirely to get things done on the ground. And the effort has been very much to try and shift this. It's been done in one way, as I mentioned, through the rights-based legislation that dominated how we thought about public policy, at least for the period between 2004 to 2009-10. And increasingly now it's being done through the narrative of technology. That technology as a tool could serve to remove all these multiple layers of human interaction that allow for the state to essentially appropriate what is citizens' due. And I think the framing of Aadhaar was very much within that context, which then lent itself to the direct benefit transfer system. And if you think, just reading the newspapers over the last 5 days, everybody is scratching their heads trying to make sense of what actually happened and why the BJP got the kind of resounding mandate that they did. Like all punditry, and as young people entering the world of punditry, let me warn you, pundits essentially spend a lot of time talking to each other with one random thought. Then they speak to each other and reinforce that idea with each other, and suddenly one random thought becomes fact, and we all start repeating those facts. So the first step the first lesson to learn in the life of public policy is never take for granted anything that someone who is considered to be an established opinion maker says to you. In all probability, it was an idea that they discussed over a drink and then it became fact. So challenge everybody and everything that you read always. But back to where what I was trying to say, in the context of the elections and this and the punditry that's trying to make sense of what is happening, there is now an increasing belief that the government, the last 5 years, have been able to push delivery better by using mechanisms like the direct benefit transfers. You see a lot more money moving into people's bank accounts. You see a lot more infrastructure being built in villages, roads, houses, toilets and so on and so forth. And so everybody was touched in some ways by the government, and that in a sense created a much more efficient government and therefore a new welfare narrative that helped government come back to power. There may well be some truth to it, but it reinforces the idea that part of the challenge of the flailing Indian state is something that can be addressed by, in some senses, getting rid of the state. If the state sort of disappears, all the actors that make that difference between Niti Aayog in Delhi and the block education officer sitting in Pune and Bihar, if you get rid of all those intermediaries and allow the government to directly touch citizens, in some ways the ability of the system to function better and more efficiently will be achieved, and the narrative of the flailing state will see some shifts. So these, I think, are the two dominant themes in which the debate on how do you get the Indian state to work better has functioned. But there's a third part to this that I think challenges a few of these assumptions. One important thing that we discovered as we went along in our work, when I first set up the accountability initiative at CPR, which is about now short of a decade ago, that was in the heydays of when the accountability movement, right to information, social auditing, strengthening local governments was very much at the center of policy discourse and policy efforts. And if you go back in history and look at every single big policy document or scheme that was launched in that phase, starting actually from early 2000s, this was also very much part of the narrative that emerged globally as well. So large international organizations, research institutions were all pushing this notion of participatory development as being very central. You'll see Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, National Health Mission, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, whichever big major Government of India program you were to pick up, you would find very clearly stated there that there would be local community participation in planning, in monitoring, in evaluating. Citizens were, on paper empowered in a way that you couldn't believe, and I wrote an article about how the Indian state is sort of opening itself up in some ways and inviting its citizens to come and scrutinize it and check out what it's doing and ask questions of it on paper in ways that were substantially different from the way in which governments are traditionally known to operate. So it was in some senses a very heady time where at least the first battle of getting policy at the top to understand the importance of citizen engagement had been achieved, and the next battle was how do you translate that into action. So we set up the accountability initiative to learn how to translate this into action, and began our work in a couple of villages in Madhya Pradesh, where we started trying to mobilize the school management committees. At that time they were called the parent-teacher associations, to start engaging with the school better. And very soon we realized that the first and most critical hurdle that we hit upon, which in fact as a result of which the entire project was a total failure, was that the school committees did not have any information, nor did they have any understanding of what actual resources, by resources I mean government financial resources, they had available for them to get things done. So we began by thinking, oh, this is just an information gap. Let's go to the block officer. I bet he knows how much budget a school. It's a very, how do you plan your monthly expenses? What is my monthly salary? What are the main things I want to spend on? How much do I have left over from last month? What do I want to do for essential things, and what do I want to save for the big night out, right? It is sort of, this is basically 101 planning करना है तो कितना पैसा आपके पास है, किस तरीके से उसको खर्च करना है, आपकी क्या प्राथमिकताएं हैं, nothing very sophisticated. You go to the block officer gives us endless amounts of tea, scratched his head and said, I have absolutely no idea. कितना पैसा आना है, किस तरीके से आना है, कब पहुंचेगा, ये सवाल आप हमसे ना कीजिए, district के पास चले जाइए. So we headed to the district. We got a similar version of that, but with a little more layers of complaining. That's the other thing that we noticed. Every place that we went, every single officer in government would repeatedly describe themselves as nothing but I am disempowered cogs in a wheel, who don't really have any information, don't really have any control. And as you go higher in the ranks, in fact, that whole narrative gets more and more louder and sharper, because you assume that a district officer, and frankly I think so do the district officers, कि लाल बत्ती की गाड़ी है तो कुछ तो करने का मौका होगा. But the narrative of lack of, we just don't know, we don't have any information. Finally, because we had to catch a train back to Delhi from Bhopal, we got to Bhopal to the Secretary of Education, who was able to pull some numbers out and give us some sense of what actually was happening. And it turns out that there were various delays in the banking system, which is why money wasn't reaching bank accounts. But even he couldn't actually take the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan budget and break it down and say how much money a school should get. We then got to Delhi and went to something called the National Institute of Public Finance Policy. That is an adjunct to the Ministry of Finance. So we figured perhaps they know how do you take a big budget of what was then I think 17,000 crores and break it down into what is the actual allocation of a school. Only to discover that they too do what good pundits do, effective, excellent guesswork. Because our budgeting system is designed in such a way that it is in effect very difficult to break down these pieces of information in ways that are actually meaningful, both to the policy implementing community of bureaucrats as well as to citizens who are apparently on paper supposed to take charge of government and hold them to account and do more than just showing up at the polling booth and voting. And we discovered that the information gap is not an information gap that can be easily resolved by filing a right to information or by pushing government to become more transparent. The information gap is caused because of the fundamental constraints of design within which the government actually does its decision making. That we have a structure where you create centrally sponsored schemes that have been part and parcel of how social policy gets implemented in India. Increasingly, Government of India takes very strong control of blind ministries in Government of India, take very strong control of these centrally sponsored schemes. In fact, before the 14th Finance Commission, this was centrally sponsored schemes were without doubt the largest special purpose transfer vehicle that the Government of India was using to finance state governments. State governments don't like centrally sponsored schemes because Government of India is taking a danda and marrowing them to say this is how you should spend and this is what you should spend on. And by the way, centrally sponsored schemes are designed in a way that give absolutely no flexibility. So the National Health Mission, for example, which originally started out in 2004 with 5 big budget items which were called flexi funds that would allow state governments to design programs the way they saw fit. After all, Kerala has a very different set of concerns to Bihar, even if you say you have to focus on things like reproductive child health. The kinds of concerns in Kerala on reproductive child health will be very different to what Bihar has to deal with. But National Health Mission went from 5 flexi fund windows to 2,000 line items as of today. So what happens is that state governments and therefore the district governments and the local governments are expected to line by line essentially come up with some number for their budget. And if you don't have your paperwork in place, and you're not able to deliver on this paperwork to the Government of India, then your funds will not get released. And the funds and Government of India too is incentivized in a very awkward way because Government of India is not spending any money, right? It's only releasing money from its coffers into the state, from the state to the district, and then finally to the expenditure entity. So when it releases money, it blocks it as an expenditure. So, and our accounting system takes 2 years before the expenditure actually gets reflected in the budget. So you only get actual expenditures in a budget document of expenditures that took place 2 years earlier, and you will get at best revised estimates that are basically releases. So we don't actually know where money is getting spent, and Government of India doesn't care anyway because wo to release ho gaya. We have an annual budgeting cycle, but an expenditure cycle that runs over 2 years, and an implementation cycle that is more complicated. So Government of India has these tightly designed, tightly controlled programs, doesn't really care how the money is getting spent because once it releases it, it can show that show it as expenditure. And in fact, it doesn't particularly like releasing money anyway because then it can get reappropriated by Ministry of Finance and go to deal with fiscal deficits when we borrow 73,000 rupees from the FCI, right? So it kind of suits everybody sitting there. State governments were getting very irritated because you were tying my hands now to a whole set of things, but money was coming. And so for state governments, this money coming did 2 very important things. Firstly, it released some of the burden of state governments. State governments were using most of their budgets to fund wages and liabilities for all these social policy programs, and they are very, very service heavy, right? Because you've got teachers, doctors, etc. that have to get paid. So what they were doing was, instead of taking Government of India money as a top-up, they were taking Government of India money as a substitute for expenditures that they have to make. And so even though it's a bit irritating to have Government of India knock on your head and tell you how to do things, and you complain about it till you go blue in the face, the fact that you're getting money that allows you to substitute your expenditures is something that, you know, kept everyone a little happy. Secondly, what used to happen until 2014, Government of India had a different political configuration, state governments had a different set of political configurations, right? So our regional tensions produced very interesting things, because state governments, political configurations of state would take some of these Government of India schemes, implement them in ways that would ensure that the political credit making would go to the states, right? So that's where you see, I mean, when I first cut my teeth in the early days of when NREJ was being implemented in Rajasthan, from where the idea had evolved. It was a BJP government at the time, and I remember the local colleagues that I was working with telling me that when NREGA got implemented, the local BJP workers were going to everybody's homes with yellow rice saying, "Aapke liye itna bada scheme aaya hai, ab aapke khate mein itna paisa aayega." So meaning there was and that created a very interesting tension. In fact, ironically, over the years we discovered that Congress states did far worse on implementing NREGA than BJP states did. Which is one of the reasons why NREGA then became the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So it was difficult for state governments to change the name and take credit for it. But so in a sense, state governments saw the benefit, even though they saw the curse of these programs. And then you go down to the district and the state and the block level, and the same sense of control would be experienced at the district and block level. All these programs require districts and blocks to make plans. But in a, you know, if you have 2,000 line items and a format that you have to fill, the whole planning process is essentially a very clever game of, you know, filling up a few Excel sheets and furthering them along. And when all of this finally reaches and budgets get approved, no information is flown. So one of the things we discovered when we started tracking budgets very closely, that even at a district level, when you're supposed to make a plan, you're not told what your average budget, what the budget is going to be. You're also not told after the budget gets approved in Delhi how much of that is actually going to reach the district. So the district has no understanding. There's no predictability, right? So you make this plan, you make a budget. You don't know how much of that has been approved. There is no predictability. If you track year on year, 1 year 90% of what you asked for got approved. The next year it dropped to 70%. The third year it dropped to 40%. Fourth year it went back to 90%. How are you supposed to actually figure out what your implementation strategy should be, right? And our public finance management system, which bases its operation on a push system, not a pull system, by which I mean an entity that is spending has to demonstrate a certain degree of expenditure before it can ask for money to be released from the top. And if the state can't show 60% expenditure, or the state doesn't fulfill a set of conditionalities, Government of India doesn't release its money. If Government of India doesn't release its money, then the district doesn't receive the money it's supposed to. So you will see at the end of the year, towards March, a huge push of money coming in. Guess what? It's because somebody realized that if you don't start moving the money right now, then it will get reappropriated. In fact, that's why for many centrally sponsored schemes, we created societies so that the money goes off budget. It reaches the consolidated fund of this, from consolidated fund of India, it reaches the state treasury. From state treasury, it goes into a society, and the society holds it there. Makes a lot of sense, because for education and health, you may not be able to spend immediately. The problem is that all this money is going off budget. There's no way of effectively tracking it except through a private audit process. There's a huge amount of money that gets accumulated because of all these problems over the course of the years. And so there's a large float. By one estimation, a float of about 1.73 lakh crores is floating in banks, earning interest for banks. So private banks are very happy. And money is not moving. And we don't have any way of actually capturing what's going on here. So cut back to what's happening at a district. Then I make a plan. I have no idea how much I'm supposed to plan for. I just inflate a few numbers here and there. And I don't really know when the money is going, how much money is going to come, and when the money is going to come. I can vaguely say that there's a bunch of money that's going to come at the end of the financial year, sometime in March. There'll be a lot of activity. By March, the school year is over, and so on and so forth. So what is the rational thing you should do if you're a district education officer? Sit back, relax, and wait for things to happen, right? So what we discovered as we started trying to look at how to get participation going, there are deep problems within the administrative system, problems of administrative lethargy, problems of deep centralization, where decision making takes place at levels that are very far away from where action happens on the ground, problems of the ability to actually ensure effective decision making, because the design of the movement of even basic governance things like public finance management is so slow that you create incentives for apathy and non-functionality. And in that kind of context, corruption can thrive because it's very difficult to catch it. But when you do try to catch it, and here I'll stop, things start getting even more complicated. So in Bihar, for instance, they tried an experiment where using technology, they try to clean up some of these public finance management systems processes. So how do you ensure that you move money faster? You link expenditure to workflow on an IT system. You also ensure that levels of government that are spending can demand money when they have finished money, so money comes to them on time, and so on and so forth. They discovered that overall expenditures reduced quite significantly, right? Now these expenditures reduced for all good reasons. It meant that there wasn't khali money. I mean, I once met a headmaster of a school in Bihar who told me that there were 2 lakhs for a school classroom that was lying in his bank account, but various clearances hadn't come. They were sitting in the school bank account for the better part of 3 years. And he had to get his daughter married. So he took that money, got his daughter married, but because he's an honest guy, kishton mein he put the money back into the bank account, and eventually 5 years after the money reached the bank account, he made the classroom. So he was very proudly telling me this whole story. And then you realize what's actually going on, right? So this kind of thing becomes difficult to do. So money is not hanging in the system, it's moving and getting spent, because you're not just parking money into bank accounts. But because you then can't draw on this money, and it becomes harder to be corrupt, the incentive to actually get things done is next to zero. So what they found was that even though, so they found overall expenditures dropped for all the right reasons, the system became more efficient and became harder to extract, but nobody was really motivated to get anything implemented. So the total employment rate dropped quite significantly in this phase, and eventually there was a fair amount of pressure on the government, so they abandoned the scheme entirely. So to the point on technology, right, that there are these deep problems inside the system. We assume these problems can be solved with technology, but in fact the way in which you can get around this flailing state narrative and the implementation failure problem is not by getting rid of a system that is non-functional. It is by doing the grunt work, doing the hard work of actually shifting and massaging the system in critical ways. To do that, you have to move beyond a very centralized structure. You have to decentralize. We have, as a country, resisted the idea of giving untied funds to local administrations and local governments. Untied funds meaning, here's 100 rupees, you best know how you should spend it, go figure. And I will monitor you for outcomes, and I will ensure that my auditors ensure that you're not stealing the money, right? And every time we've tried that, the 14th Finance Commission said untied money to states. Centrally sponsored schemes were sitting around going what to do. They converted the schemes from where the amount that states were supposed to contribute, which varied between 25 to 30%, into a 60-40 ratio. So the amount of money states now were giving from their so-called untied funds into centrally sponsored schemes increased. Of course, states are also truant, but that's a different story. Local governments, we have refused entirely to really do anything to empower our municipalities and our panchayats with finances, because we are constantly afraid of money getting spent, of corruption and money getting spent in all the wrong places. And when we do, the centralized instincts, both state and central governments are predatory like no other structure. They find ways of mission creeping. So the 14th Finance Commission said large amount of money going untied to Gram Panchayats. Ministry of Panchayati Raj sitting in New Delhi started issuing order after order after order after order, which made it near impossible for panchayats to even access the money because they had to fulfill all sorts of conditionalities. State governments thought, oh wow, there's a large chunk of money coming to panchayats, how can we best use it? So, Bihar has this Sat Nishchay scheme. So all panchayats were told, Sat Nishchay ka itna paisa aapko state government mein se aayega, baki ka paisa aap apne 14th Finance Commission ke paison se kharch kijiye. And because it's a chief minister's Sat Nishchay scheme, of course there's a lot of monitoring and focus on how all of that money goes. So we have the predatory instinct of state and central governments ensures that any attempt to effectively decentralize the system is curtailed through orders, through tight control. And this to me is the core of the problem with the Indian state, that we confuse accounting for accountability. And we think that the best way to address that story of the flailing state, that story of the unaccountable state, that story of the non-transparent state, is by trying to monitor and scrutinize every single thing that it does in ways that effectively render the state when it comes to big ticket things, like coal and 4G and 5G. The same story. Every time you try to control, you try to address the problem of big crony capital through better control, it also then makes decision making much, much harder and much more inefficient. So how we strike that balance between accounting and accountability, to me, is going to be the future of policy making.
So Yamini, you did tell us a lot about what's going on and what are the flaws in the system. I want to understand what are some of the success stories you've seen over the years wherein you've been able to sort of align your mission with the government's mission, change mindsets, and have brought about change in line items in the government. So what are some of those success stories and how have you been able to do that?
The best thing about being researchers is that you can complain about things and get away with them and not have to answer these difficult questions. But no, I think so I think there are two or three things. I think one of the most important successes, and these are not individual successes, I think it's just if you look at the trajectory of policy making, you see how small battles get won, and then the big challenge is how do you convert those small battles into winning the big war. Let's just take the right to information, the whole transparency movement itself, right? It sort of started as a small set of quirky ideas, but eventually makes its way into full-fledged legislation. And even though its implementation has been quite checkered, what it does do is that it gives tools in your hands to pursue how the structure should be designed. Right, so the ability to constantly use these tools and say, so there's a very clear requirement in the right to information that hasn't been implemented very well of Section 4, that all government authorities have to declare publicly, proactively, a set of core sets of information. Now, to have that itself is not a small thing, because once you have it, you can consistently chip away at the block and try and push for this. And there are cases when specific contexts in which that application starts making a lot of sense. I think becoming very effective. I think one example of this is in the spate of right to public service laws that got implemented, that very clearly stated that certain core public services, documentations, licenses, so on and so forth, will be given to citizens within a defined set of time. And because of that Section 4, there was a big push to put this information up in the public domain, and it's there. So you do see some shifts. The other big change that I have seen has been in the field of education. In 2003-4, actually I would say all the way to 2009 when the right to education was implemented, to get anybody in the government system to acknowledge the reality, the hard reality, that building schools is not going to lead to an effective education system, that building schools and putting teachers in there is not going to ensure that children actually learn, was very difficult. Any attempt to do that would always be blocked by saying, are you trying to say that the students are not learning? Are you blaming the student? Are you blaming the teachers? Because the teachers are working in very adverse circumstances, they don't have enough resources. We need to get schools to, we need to fix the sort of input story first before we can address any of these other concerns, and those will automatically get addressed in any case once you get the input story. But it took a good 10 years of collective mobilization, consistently hitting on the issue, consistently producing evidence on the issue, and for the envelope to change. And today you go from Delhi to Pune, you will have every single person in the education system without blinking an eyelid saying, learning quality is a problem. Now, of course, the big challenge is how do you go beyond that? Once I've acknowledged the problem, now I need to start getting to solving the problem. And that itself is a different battle. But when you keep chipping at it in this way, I do think that you see quite a lot of change.
I'll stick to education and ask you, since it's your core area of work as well, and I have spent considerable amount of time working on it as well. Let's understand the concept of teacher hiring and the perverse incentive in teacher hiring when it comes to whichever government is in power puts their teachers in place because they are the ones who control elections after that. And then the promotions are dependent on seniority. It is not dependent on the learning outcomes or your performance as an administrator. Thirdly, your problem of panchayats having no control over their schools literally, because one of the suggestions was give panchayat the control of hiring and firing the teachers. Again, that's not been met. Fourth problem which I see over the years is that 90% of the budget is going into paying teacher salaries. Where is the innovation coming from? Where is the infrastructure development going to happen? We still don't have schools with proper amenities in the rural Madhya Pradesh, or Bihar, or say even a lot of tribal Rajasthan, say just districts like Bhilwara. So how do you think accountability could be built in, or transparency is a challenge in this, because teacher hiring is happening in a certain way. I have seen before elections, if you go to an education office, 15 days interviews only take place, no work happens. So code of conduct actually starts 15 days prior because they're busy interviewing people and giving jobs to them, right? Or regularization happens, or for example, para teachers are hired, right? So how is this web of politico education nexus sort of being handled, or what are the mechanisms which could be put into all this?
So I actually think the core problem with education is not the teacher. Or everything that you say is absolutely right, and I myself have done a lot of work on teachers' wages and the big problems with teachers getting large amounts of salary to do absolutely nothing. But I come to the conclusion that the real issue is that we've always thought of the education system as a set of things that create a classroom, and not thought of the education challenge as a problem that begins and should end therefore in the classroom. And when you start thinking about it from that perspective, then you'll see that all these other pieces of the puzzle will slowly start fitting into place. And the reason for that is that we've always thought that inputs is the way you get an education system to go, and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and the right to education particularly just I think created the perfect storm for that to happen. When you start thinking about the classroom, you recognize that the real challenge is that we have classrooms where children are coming in at multiple levels of learning, but we've organized our classroom structure on the basis of age grade, right? And children are coming, the reality of how students are coming into schools in India is that they're coming in and they're going out, and they're coming in and they're going out. So we keep thinking we'll do some remedial training, some bridge courses, things will happen. And in the meanwhile, you have this very ambitious curriculum. So once a child falls back in class 1, the chances of them getting to class 5 at class 5, even if they're just sitting in the classroom consistently, are next to 0. And the big challenge for the teacher is that they are incentivized to do two things, to the extent that they are incentivized to do anything in the classroom. Curriculum syllabus completion, and as you go into higher grades, pass percentages, right? So when syllabus completion is the most important thing, you just want to race through. You don't really bother about the kids that are sitting behind. You want to address the first few kids that are kind of moving ahead, right? Every time you have taken the child and the teacher outside the classroom context and given them different, clearly defined learning competencies and goals. The same teacher, that is in exactly the vested interest context that you're talking about, I've given them a set of clear competency-oriented goals, different ways in which they can teach, freed them up from the constraints of the classroom. You see that you get very quickly a set of gains that happen. The minute the education system works in mission mode in this way, and there's a fair amount of evidence, particularly the JPAL studies on many attempts that Pratham has done to do this, you do see very, very fast gains. When we studied this, the big challenge we found is that the same teacher, when they're outside the classroom, see very big gains. When you come back into the classroom, is unable to make good on those gains. And in conversations with teachers, we found they will, when you ask the teacher, बच्चा स्कूल आ रहा है but पढ़ाई नहीं हो पा रही है, क्यों नहीं हो पा रही है? They will give you a set of answers which relate to a whole set of issues that are outside the teacher's own context. So they will say policy का problem है, अलग-अलग तनख्वाहें मिलती हैं, that the panchayat story and the panchayat teachers and the political हमें दूसरा काम दिया जाता है. Finally और कुछ नहीं हुआ तो वो कहेंगे कि देखिए आपको पता नहीं मैडम, आप तो दिल्ली से आती हैं, किस तरीके के बच्चे यहाँ पे आते हैं, वो तो बाल भी नहीं बनाते हैं, घर में जाके अपना होमवर्क भी नहीं करते. So there is, I mean, and as we went through this, we found this huge cognitive dissonance. But my sense on why this dissonance exists is because of that story of blaming. The culture of the bureaucracy is very much one, because it's so centralized, is very much one of thinking that I am a cog in a wheel in a system. I'm only a passive actor in that system. I'm not an active agent that can actually do things. So when I hit upon a problem, my energy and willingness to address the problem actively, you will never see it. Of course, the same kind of energy is most certainly exercised when it comes to extracting a bribe. I'm not taking away from that reality, but that is personal as opposed to a system that allows you to rest. So I think decentralizing the system and empowering agents at the ground level make a big difference. And to your earlier question, what leads to change? When leadership actually shifts the way in which they engage with their bureaucrats, you see a lot of shift. So when a district magistrate, instead of talking to his block education officers or BDOs or anything, just as in the grammar of hierarchy and trying to control them, says, look, here's the goal, let's see how we can fix this, and my job in every meeting is to understand your problems and see how I can help change it. You immediately see the same set of apathetic people functioning very differently. So I think that leadership change is a very central role of what we should expect our elite bureaucrats to be thinking about. Unfortunately, there's not enough thinking on these issues at that level.
I mean, staying on this, I want to probe you a little further on this, and I have a little bit of experience of why I'm saying this is low stakes versus high stake assessment, right? There's been a big debate in the education sector. Should it be low stakes? Should it be high stakes? Those of you who are not aware, low stakes is basically when you don't have anything riding on that test for a teacher or anyone in the system. High stakes is when a lot is riding on them, on the system. So there's been a debate world over. Assessment has been moving towards high stake in developed economies. PISA is largely seen as a high stake for many countries, and how their performance, Beijing shifted their entire model of working to ensure that they come first on PISA. I mean, how do you think the culture of high stake testing, that we could move toward high stake testing, which is standardized, and Pratham's Asar survey is taken for what it's worth in the government circles, and there is acceptability, and rather than doing it outside school, you start doing it within school. So what shift in mindset is required within our governance structure, and what are the key levers for doing that?
Just as a follow-up to that question, on the high stakes model, there's also been a criticism on what the stake has been called, because with respect to the Pratham survey and with respect to everything that the learning outcome focus has led to. So, for instance, the 16th Lok Sabha managed to pass an amendment to the Right to Education Act, through which they scrapped the no detention policy, and there was a lot of criticism around that how this entire group of people who advocated for the entire education model to be very dependent on learning outcomes, and therefore the entire burden shifted to the student not being able to cope up, and all the other circumstances, including from the motivation of the teacher to etc. All of those, the burden of all of that eventually fell on that hapless student, and we thought that the best way to deal with it is to just fail the student. And so what are we putting the stake on, whether it's high stake or low stake? What have we identified as the stake is also, I think, something very important. So just as something.
No, sure. I think. So look, this is a long and detailed conversation to have, but let me put it this way. I think the big push to track outcomes within the system came from the fact that to the extent that what gets measured gets done, and it's not clear that even that happens, but at least there is some stake placed on what gets measured. The Indian education system in government structure is only measuring inputs. So the entire mechanism by which plans are made, decisions are taken, money gets allocated, it's all about arriving at a certain set of inputs. And we knew over a period of time that more inputs isn't necessarily going to lead you to a place where you get better outcomes. In my view, the Asar survey is a very, very low stakes survey. Okay, it's asking a very basic set of trying to test children at a very basic set of levels, and in essence what it's trying to do is to say, are there basic foundational learning skills that a child has when it finishes through the course of its elementary schooling, and secondly, how do these levels of learning align with what is curriculum level expectation. I think that that's a fair enough question to ask. And it's not done inside schools, it's done outside the schools, and one of the reasons why it's done outside the schools is because there are a whole set of children that may not be inside school on a particular, so and it's not a pen and paper test, which is also a big difference. But anyway, the point, I think once we recognize as a policy that we need to shift focus to outcomes, we did then begin scratching our heads to figure out what that actually means. And inevitably what happens in the Indian administration is that one idea then becomes reality. So we need to track outcomes. Okay, let's just start tracking outcomes. So now you've got the National Assessment Survey, you've got NITI with its SECI, both MHRD and NITI are not talking to each other, but we've got these new mechanisms. Then you have some trial, exactly, this child tracking stuff. So all these other things are going on, but no one has actually given any thought to how do I create a system where these assessments are taken as a diagnostic tool for the system to figure out how it can work towards solving a problem. So I don't think that anybody who's been pushing for outcomes has been pushing it with the perspective of saying blame the student. Everybody who's been pushing for outcomes has been pushing it from the perspective of, or at least a significant number that I engage with, have been pushing it from the perspective of the system needs to recognize that this is the goal, not just building the school. And the best way to recognize that this is the goal is actually by going out and tracking it. And once you track it, that this could be used as a tool through which you could start figuring out how to solve the problem. On the no detention policy, it's been a trope. It's been a trope from the beginning. And essentially by giving into it, we've just sort of let it go. But to be honest, even when we had the answer to the no, every educationist will tell you that the no detention policy was a sensible thing to do. Everyone who's an actor in the system argues heavily against the no detention policy. I think the lesson for me that I took from that is not a lesson about pedagogy and education. It is a lesson about how change takes place in the Indian structure. That you have a certain consensus that gets built at the elite level to make policy shifts. But we never bother to take that consensus and make an effort to build that consensus from the top to the bottom of the system. So no teacher was ever actually given to understand. And you create a perfect storm with the parent. I mean, I was sitting and we've been tracking the changes that Delhi government has been doing. And in one of the early PTA meetings, I was sitting in the school, in the headmaster's office when the PTA meeting was taking place, and parents just came out in droves, very angry. What were they upset about? Delhi government did a very basic low stakes style assessment to figure out learning levels of class 6 students. And then they were trying to do some classroom reorganization. The issue for the parents was, आपने हमें पहले बताया नहीं कि टेस्ट होने वाला है. अगर बच्चा को पता है कि टेस्ट होने वाला है तो वो तैयारी करके आएगा, तभी तो उसको मार्क्स आएंगे. अगर तैयारी नहीं किया तो आप उसके आधार पे क्या निर्णय ले सकते हो. So I mean there is the big, I mean I have a small kid in school and I feel like even I'm falling into the trap. I'm constantly looking how many stars did she get. She's only in class 2. So we all have, there is a larger social context in which the education system has also been embedded. So parental expectations, a bureaucratic structure, and how the teacher gets incentivized. The only thing that the ACR looks at is pass percentages, to the extent that anything is looked at all. Creates this culture where you think that this is the best way, and so you keep pressuring the politician to say make these changes, right? So I think that when you think about change, you don't have to think about change just in terms of pushing the elite consensus, and all of us as policy actors do often make that mistake. It's much easier in a sense to go to Niti Aayog, to go to parliament, to go to state governments and start pushing your ideas. It's much harder to have that conversation with a block education officer. And we never did it. I mean, the right to information movement didn't do it. The whole rights movement, I think that was one of the big mistakes. When SSA got converted, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan got converted into the right to education. I started asking all the block officers that we were meeting when we would hang around, कि अब ये तो कानून बन गया, आपके लिए इसका मतलब क्या हुआ? The only answer I got was कानून है तो हम माँ बाप के घर में जाके बोल सकते हैं कि बच्चे को स्कूल में नहीं भेजोगे तो आप जेल में जाओगे. Now, of course he's thinking like that because you're an officer of the state. Your job is to maintain law and order. So for you, a kanun is a kanun. Where did you ever have a mobilization effort with the block education officers? When did any rights activist, or for that matter, a politician come and talk to these block education officers and explain what a right is? We never bothered.
I want to talk about next 5 minutes about impact bonds, social impact bonds and development impact bonds, because pay for success model, even World Bank in its grants now to various countries is adopting a lot of it. A lot of the non-profits, especially the one which I work with, is successfully implemented development impact bond. What do you think is impact bonds advantages, and do you think it can be a lever which could be used to put more accountability, especially in the funding which is coming from multilaterals or especially in project-based funding, which is given by the government to the state. JN and RUM is a perfect example.
Yeah.
The second tranche would be given if the utilization of first tranche was done, right? So on and so forth. I mean, what do you think about all these initiatives?
If you track the history of JN and URM, you'll also see how money didn't move and then money moved where everybody just did some checklist changes. So I mean, I think there's a larger question embedded in there, which is are there ways of creating performance-based incentives using fiscal tools? And I think that governments, policymakers, policy actors, practitioners have been struggling with this question and experimenting with it in many ways. And development impact bonds, I think, are an interesting example of it. But I haven't yet found the perfect answer. I think that impact bonds work very well when you're talking about them in a very specific technocratic context of delivery, where the task is much easier to monitor and scrutinize, and when scale is not achieved. And the minute you go down to scale and you embed it in a system where movement of money is, I mean, even the bank has to move money. And you'll find after they hold out on all these performance indexes, they eventually just give in and they start moving money. So I think that this is a very big challenge and a big concern. The 15th Finance Commission has been mandated through its terms of reference to look at performance-based financing for centrally sponsored schemes and social policies. It's something that we've all been advocating for. Outcome budgeting, Delhi government, as you mentioned, has been moving a little bit in that direction. As somebody who pushes this idea, I also recognize how difficult it is to implement it, and I'm not sure how exactly one can help address the challenge of gaming the system. And it goes back to, we were talking about PISA. Look at what Shanghai did, right? I mean, look at what the government of India is doing. So now we finally agreed to do PISA all over again. We'll only do it in Kendriya Vidyalayas and we'll do it in Chandigarh. And we're doing it very carefully. The last time we did, we said Himachal and Tamil Nadu, we got badly bashed. So now we are sticking, and we've got 1 year of preparatory time. Now, to the extent that that kind of effort creates a certain mission mode energy to move the envelope, I think that that's really a good thing, right? Everybody just mobilizes and tries to get things done.
Thank you so much for the talk, ma'am. It's quite thought-provoking. The same problems which you, the same process in which you are elaborating about the interacting with teachers and the problems you're facing, I work with one of the Central Government of India's flagship skilling program, and it's a placements linked program. So we face the same problem with the trainers. Now, the trainers, when we inquire about, now this program basically was brought when 2014 when the government came, BJP government came, and the idea was that the skilling program and vocational program are not successful in India because the infrastructures, norms are not decided, again the SSA story. So now this program has come, all this nice classroom and everything is in place, but again the actual challenge, training quality has not improved. Now when we inquired and talked to the trainers, this is bit tricky because in classroom they still have this, norm ki you sit with the girls sits one side, boys sit one side, you finish the curriculum and all. The trainers are not supposed to do that because it's a training, it's not teaching. Now they are following teaching exactly, and when we try to do some intervention there as part of my current job, the trainer gives the same response. Aise bacche aate hain, and the people who come in this program are school dropouts. And from, of course, BPL families. They're like, उनको brush करना भी नहीं आता है. We're talking to soft skills teachers and they're like, ऐसे लोगों को अगर हम brush करना ही सिखाते रह जाएंगे तो क्या English पढ़ाएंगे? क्या 3 महीने की training में कैसे वो नौकरी लेंगे? That's one question. So, do you think, what is your take on that? What further intervention can be? Now, the second is, there is a certain salary which government has set that if these people are placed, this much they have to take. What has happened? I'll give you an example. Some student was trained on BPO training and all, and supposed to go and do the BPO wala job. Now that person in one of the placement verification was found to be a crane operator, and he is operating a JCB without any training. So you were asked कि तुमको इतना अच्छा training दिया classroom में बिठा के नौकरी भी दिलाया तुमको, फिर तुम वो नौकरी क्यों नहीं कर रहे हो 6,000 का? And he said वो 6,000 में भी तो नहीं हो रहा है, ये मेरा दोस्त 10,000 का कर रहा था crane operator, मैं इसके साथ थोड़े दिन सीखा, मैं तो ये कर लिया. So this training quality is impacting ये problem. Now the people who are trained in these skilling programs are not getting paid more than the people who are not trained at all. So if I'm a school dropout, I don't know anything and I don't go to your free skilling program, I get paid more than what your skilling person is getting paid. And this is again coming back to that training classroom ka quality to change हुआ नहीं है. So what according to you should be some more interventions, because that's what currently we are brushing our, hitting our brains on.
To begin with, I never understood why we have a skills ministry and a human resource development ministry. I think the two need to merge. First things first. And in fact, that whole curriculum story needs to get embedded into the secondary education curriculum structure. But I mean, what you're describing is very similar to exactly the kinds of problems that the education, traditional curriculum also faces, and the big challenges there. I think that it requires, so two things. I think the curriculum development process has to be much more agile, that means that we use tropes like stakeholder consultation a lot, but I think that in the particular instance of skilling, that needs to be done with a lot more seriousness, because I'm not entirely sure that the curriculum is necessarily designed in a way that effectively maps onto market demand. And that's at least my understanding of it is...
Curriculum is designed by sector skill councils and National Council of Vocational
Exactly,
Training.
exactly.
And those curriculums designed are by private bodies and they get paid.
Exactly.
There is a course also for cycle में हवा भरने के लिए भी एक course designed by SSC. Now who will go and do that course? So that's the course.
Yeah, so I think there's a combination of both, right? So how you design your curriculum, and then how do you map that onto the teachers and the capabilities, and we never actually figured out what is it that people are coming to these skill centers for. I think there's an aspirational difference there as well, which is comes out very neatly in the example that you're describing. So I think certainly some more perhaps engagement with people who have participated in these courses, tracking their career trajectories to see what happens, may help you to map that. And bridge that link between what is it that they are learning in the classrooms and what is it that they actually are going out and doing, and where the ultimately people are choosing jobs for a very different set of reasons, and we don't fully know. Again, I think we've had this constant push on jobs. We know that we are not producing enough jobs for people, but we all have no idea what are the kinds of jobs people actually are looking for. And I think that certainly needs to. So again, it goes back to where I began. I think a lot more decentralization is needed. If you actually hand over the task of at least mapping out कहाँ पे skilling center जाना चाहिए और कौन से लोगों को बुलाना चाहिए skilling center में इन चीज़ों के लिए, to the local administrators and the local panchayats, you'll probably see a lot more alignment because they understand the local job market.
I'll add on to that.
Maybe we'll have to move on. Sorry, please. We have
You can add it offline. You can take it offline.
So you want to ask a question?
The last one.
Okay.
Decentralization.
Yeah, we have a question there.
I have a question relating to the different types of schools that are emerging, the trending schools that are emerging these days. We have a test to determine the level of knowledge that students possess only on two stages, either on 10th grade and the 12th grade. But we fail to understand that it is actually an accumulation of learning which results in both these two stages. I was interacting with a student of class 9, a boarding school student, and it was a school that that probably had scope for overall learning as such, but they were not following any particular state curriculum. But they also have to fulfill the tests, the timely tests and the audits done by the government. So in order to account for those, they keep examinations and they write the answers to the examination on the board which students copy, and they submit these as evidences. So there is a big abyss between the kinds of schools that are developing, the levels of knowledge that can be tested. So what can the government or policy tanks do in order to bridge this gap or in order to test these differences?
I mean, I think part of this problem is already well known. The fact is that the whole system is incentivized to maximize pass percentages, and especially when you go to higher grades, so from 9th class onwards, you see that there's only actually a 3-month window in which any teaching takes place, and that's between July and September before you get your first assessment. After that, it's all focused on ensuring that those who are going to be in a position to pass are taught in a way that they can actually pass the exam and maximize it as much as possible. And every time attempts have been made to try and shift the teachers more out of that, because there's this old muscle memory, it keeps coming back. So I think the one thing I've noticed that really helps in shifting mindsets is when the system converts into mission mode. And there's an irony here because I've always also argued that we do too many things in mission mode and we're never able to embed them back into the system. But I've noticed certainly repeatedly in education that when you give the teacher a very clear set of goals and a clear timeline in which that goal has to be implemented, and then give them some tools but leave them freed up to experiment as they see fit, you will see a lot of significant shifts. So I think, just literally pushing the system to lurch from mission 1 to mission 2 to mission 3 to mission 4 to keep the heat on, and working simultaneously with administrators. So in Delhi government, for instance, I mean, this is an ongoing piece of work, so I might be speaking too soon to what my final conclusions will turn out. But one of the things that we've seen is that even though the political policy shift is trying to say that we are not going to worry the system with its pass percentages, because really what we want is to ensure that we tweak pedagogy and we change learning so that children actually learn, and learning is joyful, and they've even got their happiness curriculum and so on and so forth. The everyday experience that the teacher has is with the administrator, and the administrator is still very much working with the teacher in the context of where your ACR is going to matter, where your pass percentages are going to matter, and then you've got this overarching political environment where the minute the class 10 and class 12 board exam results come out, suddenly all the newspapers and all opinion makers are asking, so have Delhi government reforms been successful? Has there been a change in the pass percentage rate? So you've got a whole multiple set of incentive structures that then bear down on the system that keep pushing it to go back to the old. So the only way I think that reform can actually happen is to constantly challenge the system and get it to work on the things that it knows how to work on, which is just move it in mission mode. Just keep it going in mission mode for 2 or 3 years. Maybe you will then see some shifts in mindsets and understandings of actors. So that, and then to do that, you also have to go back to standard things you need to do. Ensure that you have some kind of stability in tenure of. Clean up the transfer system, clean up the teacher appointment process, so that some of those costs of governance are reduced.
Anyone has a question on that side? Yeah.
We have 7 minutes.
So my question is to decentralization and centralization discourse we picked up earlier in the conversation. So the present ruling party, BJP, came into power in 2014 on the back of a lot many taglines, one of which was minimum government is maximum government. The Yamini Aiyer was formed with one of the mandates being to give the states as an authority and possibly autonomy in creating policy and schemes, for they know what works best for them. And arguably neither has the tagline nor Niti Aayog been able to follow them to the tenth. Historically, India has always had decentralization as a very powerful thinking process. It's not something new. Be it the 73rd, 74th Constitutional Amendment, Mahatma Gandhi also emphasized on it. But why is it that centralization is almost always the default state of mind for the Indian state per se? We all know decentralization is the way to go, yet centralization is what we see everywhere. So what are the reasons behind it?
It's a big puzzle, and in fact it's a funny tug of war, because one of the things, I completely agree with you. I've been writing about this for a while now. We are now in fact going to enter into, I think, a world of even more centralization, if that were possible, and despite all the tropes. But the other irony is that everybody likes decentralization only up to their level, right? So states may cry horse for more money from center, but they haven't even bothered to set up their state finance commissions to push things down to the local level. And I think one of the things that is making this the narrative of decentralization even harder to pursue is that there is a tension in that analytically you may push for decentralization as a right way to go from the policy perspective, but you have a political culture that is very centralized. So whether it is now in Government of India, or if you look at even the states that have non-BJP formations, the chief ministers have always controlled power in the chief minister's hands. And to some extent that power allows some things to happen. So go back to the early days of Nitish Kumar, 2010 onwards till about 2012, 2013. He was very much seen as a very powerful chief minister's office that relied on a certain section of bureaucrats to get things done. Same was the story with Modi, same was the story with Naidu. I mean, wherever you go, you see. So we've got these very powerful political structures, and the political party organization never actually relies on the local government system as a mechanism to throw up power and talent, right? It's always about, it's always looking at local sangatans that are outside of the panchayat system. So I think, that has always been a really important challenge. And even though the 73rd, 74th Amendment were implemented in the early 90s, Congress could have potentially considered drawing on panchayats as a means, but it never did. And ultimately, I think the only way in which you will see decentralization at that level, it will take place if and when panchayats themselves are able to mobilize as a political entity, panchayats and municipalities, and as political entities put pressure on state governments, just in the way that state governments as political entities can and sometimes do at the center. I also think that we now need to be looking at very new kinds of institutional structures for center-state dynamics to play out. The Interstate Council, I think, could be an umbrella, but the GST Council is one example. It has its flaws in how it's getting implemented, but it's one example of how this can be done. There's been some talk about creating a similar mechanism for agriculture. Every big challenge, climate change, it's going to require state governments to function in some larger mold that the government of India produces, and then there's a global set of things that we've signed up to. Urbanization. I think we do need to think about what are different ways in which you can create both administrative dialogues through councils of this nature as well as political dialogues, which is the real hard test, because politics is just too centralized, whether you talk about a regional party or a national party. And they've never seen local governments as a mechanism through which to expand patronage and political power.
Ma'am, I've worked a bit. I worked for 1 year in South Bihar as part of Aurangabad district at the district level. So, like you spoke a lot about mission mode, taking schemes in mission mode. I've seen the Swachh Bharat mission in mission mode, and I know the pros and cons of it. Yes, we do progress, but then there are.
I agree. Yeah.
There are this thing, like we do have a lot of slippages. So I am not particularly an advocate of mission mode, but again, I've seen the lethargic system. I've attended the DM every Monday meeting with the DM, and then all sorts of meetings with the education department as well, because Swachh Bharat mission has a lot to do with the education and other departments as well, Poshan Abhiyan, etc. So when it comes to accountability and progress of work, decentralization is the way, but somewhere I feel centralization, having too much of decentralization is also something which have its own harms, because I've seen corruption at the ground. I've seen when block level officers or BDOs or district level officers, they do have the power, they take everything in their hand, and the money which is being spent, the accountability of that money spent at the block level is very, I don't really, from my experiences, I don't really see any fear in them from whatever wrongdoings they have been doing. So what do you see in the future when we are having now we are having a lot of planning happening at the central level and the state level as well? How do you see that growing ahead in the years to come?
So first, I think your question kind of takes me back to where I left in my opening remarks, this challenge of accounting versus accountability. There's absolutely no argument that the localized corruption is a very deep-seated issue, and the localized apathy is a deep-seated issue, and the concern you articulate on the mission mode thing is without doubt a very big reality. I think Swachh Bharat is a grand example of that. What did you get in the end? You got a whole bunch of toilets being built for a program that required you to actually mobilize people to start understanding and demanding toilets. We've not done any demand generation. We've just forced, built somewhere, kahin gadhe khod diye and bol diya that we have achieved ODF, and we've moved on. But to my mind, I think the only way we can think about this differently is to recognize that the sole purpose of the system is to shift it towards service delivery goals. The minute you shift it towards service delivery goals, you may not be able to cut down the corruption, but you will start seeing more changes on the ground. And I think we must also remember that we've created a system basically that was designed for a very different set of expectations. Our entire bureaucracy was structured for a world where you can build a school, create a road and exit. When Whereas now expectations are way beyond that. We want the school to function, we want people to actually use toilets, we want the curriculums for skill training to actually be designed in a way that ensure that people have opportunities in the labor market. So, you know, and we place all these expectations on the government, but we don't bother talking about administrative reform. So it's literally like going to, you know, coming to India with a UK plug and thinking that your computer will start working. You've got the wrong plug in the wrong socket. And we really have to start changing the envelope on that. So to me, ultimately, this whole story will only see changes when we start taking administrative reforms linked to decentralization seriously. There is an inherent tension in centralization and decentralization. I think that tension is when magic happens. And we have to be willing to live with that tension and let those pulls and pressures take place. But when you get scared of that tension and say the only way to stop it is by tightly controlling, so I use technology to control, I won't give untied funds, I won't give any powers, you basically have created a system that is by design apathetic and will not budge. You know, and sure, you can do district, you can do video conferences with district magistrates coming out of PMO and everybody will circle, you will get your result. You can't deny Ujjwala has reached, you can't deny that PMAY has built some houses, you can't deny that toilets have been built, but to what end? What is your end goal? Has the housing gone to the right people? Are the toilets effectively being used? Have we created solid liquid waste management systems that will actually address the fundamental problem of health, which is why government is telling you to where and how you should do something that is totally private. You know, so we have to shift the goalpost towards the outcomes. There's multiple forms of pressure that are being placed on government today in ways that are very different to 20 years ago. All of us as actors, even 15 years ago, 17 years ago when I started working, there were no opportunities like this to learn. And all of this means that we have a whole new cohort of citizens that are very actively interested in ensuring that the country does better. And that puts pressure on the state. And the state can only respond to that pressure when we start enabling it to reform itself. And right now that administrative reforms question has been brushed under the carpet, and to the extent that it gets pushed out, we bring it out to say, let's do some technology enabled changes that will cut out layers of the state. But you know, you cut out layers of the, even if you convert to a completely cash-based welfare structure where people are getting 72,000 in their bank accounts or whatever you want, someone has to regulate. Who's going to regulate? Who's going to regulate your health system? Who's going to regulate your education system? It requires a very different architecture of government.